the 2019 recruiting haul was a disappointment by USC standards, still by most. As a top 20 class, still a fine class, but not the elite selection of athletes that you typically get. A couple of those guys, but not 8 or 10 of those guys that we see at the top of draft boards or recruiting services. 2020, your thoughts about where we're headed? As we mentioned, and you explained to me before we started to record, it just seems as though, and I've seen this as well, that more players are being plucked away from Southern California than at any time in recent memory by the likes of the SEC and others, as opposed to USC really locking down the best players in that part of the state.
Yeah, well, I think some of these schools smell blood in the water, and LSU's already gotten 2 commitments from 2 schools, Mater Dei and Narbonne, that USC usually kind of owns when it comes to recruiting. Both very good schools football-wise, and they both produce a lot of prospects. So that's a problem. Although later today, USC might get a commitment from Joshua Jackson, a wide receiver from Narbonne. So that would be like the first probably bit of good news for them in terms of 2020. But they have a lot of obstacles when it comes to recruiting right now, because the kids know Clay Helton might not be back next season, and people that are getting recruited by them want to see what happens on the field next year, and they want to see how the offense looks. They want to see if the defense is better. They want to see if players are developing. That's the biggest thing recruits say, is players are not developing at USC. So it's hard to recruit right now for them, because schools are telling their recruits, if you go to USC, you're not going to get better, and you don't know who the coach is going to be during your career.
And I believe we're referring to a 5-star cornerback, Elias Ricks, who has committed to LSU as part of their number 2 nationally ranked class right now, according to 247 Sports, and also the second-rated running back in the nation from Clovis, California, Kendall Milton. So still plenty of talent in the southern portion of California, just need to reel them in. And as you mentioned, with Clay Helton on the hot seat, most people believe, then players like to know who they're going to be playing for, and 5 and 7 is not a good look either.
Well, Ricks in particular, he's the number 1 corner in his class, but his mother went to USC. So in the past, a guy like that was just locked for USC, and here he is already committed to LSU. And I know kids change their mind all the time, but it's a bad look right now when he's going to LSU. And then there's also a big defensive tackle, Josh Berry from Narbonne, who's committed to LSU. So, it hurts probably a little bit too for them when Ed Ogeron used to coach at SC for many years, and he can come in now and take guys that normally would have gone to USC.
No, it's a great point that you just made, because most of us are familiar with Ed Ogeron's brief stay as head coach on the interim basis, in which he won 6 or 7 games and represented himself fairly well, but didn't wrap up the permanent job. But that was at the end of a long coaching reign on the staff there at USC. So he definitely has his ties as being firmly entrenched in recruiting there for a long time as an assistant. So definitely a good point there. Scott Wolf from Inside USC, breaking down Trojans football. Anything else we need to hit you up on here, Scott?
Well, they do have new coaches at running back, defensive line, defensive back. So there's been turnover on the staff, and I think they view that as a good thing. And a lot of people, I think it's a good thing. The question is going to be, can you come in 1 year and make a big transformation, especially when you've still got Clancy Pendergast as the defensive coordinator, John Baxter, special teams coach. And those 2 guys, especially Baxter, get criticized a lot by the fans, but Helton loves him. So you've got a little bit of a disagreement there on how good a coach he is. And Pendergast didn't do a great job last year either with the defense. So it's going to be an open question how much change there really is that's taken place over there, because we know the offense is going to be a lot different, but we don't know if the defense and special teams is going to be a lot different.
And Scott, I've got to think that the schedule is a concern as well, because taken in totality, it's a tough schedule. It's a strong schedule, but it's not a ridiculous schedule. But the problem is that coming off 5 wins, and with the vibe of the program being what it is, at least the perception of that, coming off the 5 wins, and with a young team, young quarterback, inexperienced quarterback for the most part, depending on who wins the job, out of the gate is the difficulty. So the record could be decent at the end if Clay Helton can keep his players' heads in the game, because they may not get off to the best start when you look at Fresno State, Stanford, BYU, Utah, Washington, and Notre Dame the first 6 games.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those schedules where, it's not the toughest schedule in the world, really. But as you saw last year, if you're not playing very well, it can suddenly turn into a tough schedule. I mean, it's amazing that they lost to Cal last year, and they were 5-7 playing in the Pac-12 South, which was atrocious by national standards. So now all of a sudden, because of that, Fresno State was good last year. Stanford's always a tough game. BYU, if they're on, they beat Wisconsin last year. So, Notre Dame's Notre Dame. So if USC's sloppy, not quite sure of itself, has these bad habits from last year, yeah, they could be in a lot of trouble. But, in the old days, a USC team probably wouldn't have been too worried about that schedule. So it's going to be interesting to see how they react. They don't have a lot of confidence, I think, going into the season. So if they have some early adversity, then watch out. That could be a problem.
All right. Good insight from Scott Wolf on Inside USC. Scott, we appreciate you stopping by.
Anytime. I love talking football.